Hi, welcome back. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I hope that some of my viewers find it interesting, and I also hope that people who haven't found this channel yet might stumble upon this video and find it interesting, because I wanted to make some booktube type videos, and I've scripted now 6 or 7 video ideas and have many more in the works, but I thought I would just start with something I have strong opinions on. I have a personal preference for watching kind of ranty booktube videos and mostly negative booktube videos. I think it's a real guilty pleasure for me. I honestly think it just makes me feel better as a writer, but I know I like them and find them interesting. So we're going to talk about Infinite Jest, because I have a lot of feelings and they're mostly negative. But also, most of these booktube videos that I've watched, they seem like they're focused on books that were published recently, at least in the last couple of years, or, based on roundups of the year, based on awards, and books that have a lot of buzz. And I think people mostly use them, the way that they would use a book review magazine or something to decide what they want to read of what's being published right now. And so this is kind of a weird start because this was published in 1996. But anybody in the reading, writing world knows that this is still, infinitely topical. People still talk about it. People talk about it a lot. And people tell you to read it, and it is inescapable. So I figured it was a pretty good place to start. I intend to make videos that are more recent, about more recently published books. But let's just start with Infinite Jest, because I have things to say. Unfortunately, more disclaimers. I read this book in the summer of 2017, so my thoughts are not that fresh, and I didn't annotate at all because I was just trying to get through this book. But I still remember enough to, formulate my opinions and things like that. So let's first talk about the difficulty of reading this book. Now, this is over 500,000 words, okay? Look at my copy. This is the kind of thing, my mom would describe this as looking like well-loved, but it was not. It's just physically difficult to read a book of this size without it getting all ripped and stuff. I attempted this book twice, which is not so bad, actually. I know people who've tried to read it 4 or 5 times. The first time I tried to read it was on a Kindle. Now, there's pros and cons to that. On the one hand, if you don't already know, this book contains, infamously, a lot of footnotes, and the footnotes are not what you would think of when you think of a footnote. Here's a footnote. Doesn't look like a footnote, does it? Oh, no, sorry. I think that might have been. Now, here are our footnotes. They are long footnotes. The footnotes go on for pages and pages, and it makes it weird to read because you're taken out into this other story a lot of the time and then back to the main story. And so just in terms of physically flipping back and forth, it can be nice to be on an e-reader because you can just click the footnote and it'll take you to the back of the book and then it'll take you back right where you were, and you don't need 2 bookmarks. Otherwise you need 2 bookmarks to read this book, okay? Whew! Not a normal book. So that's the pro. One of the cons, though, to reading this book on a Kindle is that Kindle, or, I assume other e-readers do this, other devices, they'll tell you how many hours it's going to take you to read the book at the speed that you're reading it, which, it just doesn't help to be told that you're 60 hours away from reading the book. It just, I don't know. I would recommend getting a physical copy, buying it, of course, because you're not going to finish it in the time it takes, in the amount of time that the library gives you to read it, and you're also going to need 2 bookmarks. Or you can read it on a Kindle, but just maybe try not to look at how many hours it's going to take you to read. Or look at it. I feel like this review is largely going to be focused on the central question with Infinite Jest, which is it worth it? Because for me, okay, this book took me 4 months to read, not including the first attempt. So probably more like 5 months, because I think I spent a good month reading it before I gave up on it the first time. But ultimately, from start to finish, it took me 4 months to read. And at the end of that 4 months, I just had this overwhelming feeling of first of all, relief that thank God I'm done with this book. But also, I could have read 10 or 12 other books. So like I said, it's about 500,000 words. That's, I think, like 7 average length books. I mean, it depends what kind of genres you read and what, lengths of books you read, but that's like 7 books. But I think it took me even longer than, the equivalent number of books because it's a difficult thing to read. It's not easy. With the footnotes and David Foster Wallace's writing style, and his sentences are often very, very long, and it's not an easy book to read. So that was the thing. I got out of it feeling like, well, I could have read this or 12 other books, and ultimately I wish I had just read 12 other books. But yeah. The other thing that convinced me to read it, though, is like people finish it and they have this smug air of like, I finally finished Infinite Jest, like I'm part of the club of people who finished it. And I think I just wanted to be in that club. And now I would rather not be in the club. So it's hard to give an overall opinion of it. Like, I would say, I guess I would give it about 3 stars, but it's one of those books where like parts of it are 5 stars and parts of it are 1 star. And again, it's really, to me, more of a question of, is it worth reading? And for me, no. The answer is no. But it doesn't make it a bad book. It's just incredibly long. So let's talk about the book. I've been going on and on about little features of the book and, what it's like to read it and the experience of reading it. But I can tell you what the book is actually about, although that's kind of a hard question to answer. But okay, there are 3 main plot lines of Infinite Jest. There is the Tennis Academy stuff with Hal Incandenza, who is basically the main character, but again, there's 3 plot lines, and his is only one of those 3. But he's the first character you meet, and I think of him as the main character. And so he's at this tennis academy where, he's a student, and his mother works there, and there's also this unfolding family history of the Incandenzas, and yeah, that's the first plot line. Then there's what I would call the political stuff, because try as I might, I didn't really understand it or get much out of it. So this book takes place in the future, but it's not at a set future date, it's just the future sometime, and the US, Mexico, and Canada are one nation. And there's this group of political radicals called the Wheelchair Assassins, who are pretty straightforward. They're in wheelchairs. They assassinate, or attempt to assassinate. I don't even remember. Every time I got to one of these sections, I would just sigh. Like, here we are again with the Wheelchair Assassins. Personally, I found that plotline pretty boring, and that made it difficult. But there's a third plotline as well, which is takes place in this AA group. So those are the 3 main plot lines. And again, in terms of the is it worth it question, one of the problems with this book is, okay, you have 3 plot lines. If you don't like one of those plot lines, you will have to read 2 or 3 normal length books worth of a plot that you don't even find interesting. And that's what happened to me, because I liked the family history stuff, I liked the AA stuff, the political part was incredibly boring, and that was a third of the book. So but let's talk about some positives. I didn't hate it. I did not hate this book, and I recognize in some ways, the things about David Foster Wallace's writing that people like, and I recognize that in some ways he is kind of a good writer, I guess. And I could never write a 1,000-page book. I also wouldn't want to write a 1,000-page book, but, hey, I'll give him credit for that. The things I liked. So I did really like the Incandenza family story. Today, I am wearing my Margot Tenenbaum dress because this is in part the story of a talented, intelligent, troubled family, which I have a bit of a soft spot for some reason. I don't know. I liked that part. I found that interesting. And I liked the way it sort of unfolded. There are some mysteries in this book. I liked the opening scene as well, where we meet Hal, and he's a genius, and I think, from the reader's perspective, you understand that he is actually a genius, but he's in this academic meeting with the dean, and they are basically accusing him of plagiarizing, in part because he's not speaking in this meeting. He refuses to speak, or he can't speak. It's a little unclear, and that was a really intriguing start. I was like, wow, maybe this book won't be so hard for me to read. This is a really interesting plot. Unfortunately, you have to wait 1,000 pages for that to be wrapped up, because this book has the structure, this sort of infinite loop structure, where you start, and then you flash back, and then you work your way back to where you started. Which is a structure that I've liked in other books. I like it in The Third Policeman, where you end where you started, because it makes thematic and logical sense in that book. In this book, I don't know, I was just so happy that it was over. I didn't really care how it ended. But I did like that little mystery of what's going on with Hal, and I kind of liked how it was wrapped up, although it's not really 100% answered. I think you could make an argument for different things. I felt like he was drugged, but I'm not sure. It doesn't really tell you. The author doesn't really tell you, but that was an interesting little mystery. I liked the Incandenza family. I really like David Foster Wallace's dialogue across the board. I thought it was well written. It was interesting, but sort of believable, and I think he must have been a really smart guy to write such smart characters in a way that is believable. Like I said, this is kind of a really smart, talented family. Hal is a genius who has memorized a dictionary. His older brother is a football star. His dad was a filmmaker. His mother works at this tennis academy. I don't know, they're successful, they're intelligent. They are geniuses, basically. Or at least Hal is. And I liked reading about them. Another little mystery, we know that Hal's father is dead. We know that he committed suicide, trigger warning. But we don't really know how, and I don't know how I feel about this. I've seen this happen in other books where like a traumatic thing is presented as basically a mystery for us to uncover. From the reader's perspective, of course, the character who experienced the trauma knows what happened and is just not talking about it because it was traumatic. And it's kind of held as this mystery. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it's a little, I don't know, for people who have actually been through trauma to kind of make it like this plot point of like uncovering it. I don't have anything intellectual or I don't have any concrete things to say about it, but it's something that kind of gives me pause. But as a reader, in terms of just my enjoyment, I did like the horrible, shocking reveal. But I don't, rubs me the wrong way a little bit. But yeah, and again, David Foster Wallace likes to shock. We've got the wheelchair assassins. I can't remember if I mentioned that the way that they become in wheelchairs is as little boys, they're all men in this group, they go through this ritual where they have to lay down on these train tracks and let their legs get destroyed. David Foster Wallace likes to shock people. It's interesting. I don't feel this characterized as like a violent book, but there are just these shocking, violent things about it. And like one of the things, again, I read this 3 years ago, and one of the things that will be in my brain forever is the way that they reveals Hal's father's suicide. I think he's on the phone with his brother, and his brother's like making him talk about it, and he doesn't want to talk about it, but he finally says like his brother's asking him how his father killed himself because Hal found him and doesn't talk about it for understandable reasons. And eventually Hal says, like, it's revealed that the body was kind of all over the place, and the brother's wondering how that's possible. And eventually Hal says, well, you know how when you put a potato in the microwave, you have to poke holes in it? And that's how we find out that Hal's father put his head in the microwave? Whew. I feel like maybe this is a me thing. But again, I read this book 3 years ago, and that is one of the things that stands out about it. These are the things that really stick with me. And I don't know how I feel about it. It feels a little weird. It feels like David Foster Wallace kind of just likes to shock people. I don't know. I don't even know if I needed to tell you that, but maybe take that into account when you think about reading this book. Okay. Back to things I liked. I started talking about things I liked. The family story, the dialogue, the family slang. So there's this cool way that Wallace captures the way that families have their own little way of talking. Like, they call their father himself, which is very strange, but I can really see it with this, like, quirky intellectual family. I could see that being what they call their dad. They also call him the mad stork or the sad stork. I think it's just the older brother that calls him that, but they call their mom the moms. I feel like that is interesting. I don't know. Every family has their own little things like that. And I feel like he captured that better than I think actually any other book I've read. So that's a huge plus, you know, the dialogue and the little family quirks and the little quirky ways that the family speaks and their kind of family slang. I like that stuff. As I said, I liked the opening scene, even though I was mad that I had to wait 1,000 pages to find out what was going on. I liked the criticism of AA. This is where I feel like we get some pretty interesting insight into David Foster Wallace, and maybe I'm reaching and I can't really know this, but like, he did obviously suffer from depression and ultimately committed suicide, and I actually don't know if he had any addiction problems, but he talks, well, one of the characters in the book talks a lot about like the difficulty of accepting the tenets of AA and these little, not just like the 12 steps, but the little sayings that people will say that are commonplace in AA. Because this character is like analyzing these things and trying to understand how they work or if they make sense. And people are saying like, don't think about it, don't analyze it, just do what we're telling you and you'll get better. And it just doesn't work. The character won't do it. And I feel like that's a really, really interesting criticism of perhaps AA or other addiction services or mental health services not necessarily working for very intelligent, critical, analytical, overthinky people. And I really feel like David Foster Wallace probably couldn't have written that if he had not experienced something similar. And in any case, it's interesting. It's a good point. I liked reading about that. Things I didn't like, mostly just how long it is. Yeah, like I said, I don't think it needed to be 1,000 pages long. I don't think it was written for a general reader. And I have, you know, at this point in my life, I just like to read things that are fun and interesting. Like, I like for it to be well written. I like for the voice to be doing interesting things and the writer's style to be interesting. But I don't like to read difficult books anymore. I was an English major. I read a lot of classics. I read Shakespeare. I read Chaucer. I read all the stuff that you're supposed to read, and I am just done reading difficult books. I actually think that this was the very last difficult book that I read, and I think it really maybe put me on a different trajectory where I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done with reading difficult books because people told me that I should. That's another thing I need to talk about quickly. No, I'll get to that later. There are more things that I liked. I liked the subsidized time. There are basically companies that have like sponsored the year in this book. So when it tells you when the time switches, you know, it jumps around in this book, and it'll start by saying like year of the Whopper, year of the Tux medicated pad, year of the trial size Duff bar. That's funny. I like cultural criticism. I like criticism of like capitalism run amok. That was funny. I liked that. This book is obviously supposed to be funny. I mean, I think the title is obviously in reference to one of the films that Hal's dad has made, but also it is supposed to be funny. And people who really, really like this book say that it's really funny. If you don't gel with the sense of humor, then you're not going to really like it in the way that people who love it do, and unfortunately I didn't find it that funny that often. There were little moments, but it felt a little self-indulgent a lot of the time. Whew, we're already 19 minutes in, but hey, it's Infinite Jest, there's a lot to say. Other things I didn't like, well, this is kind of, I liked it and I didn't. There's this character, Joelle Van Dyne, also known as the Pea Goat, or the prettiest girl of all time. She is Hal's older brother's girlfriend for a while. They date, they break up. Then she is in the AA program, and she has a disfigured face because someone threw acid at her, and then she just wears a veil all the time. I liked her as a character, sort of. I enjoy the exploration of, like, beauty lost, you know, navigating the world as a really beautiful person and then losing that. Jennifer Egan wrote a book called Look at Me that explored that a lot, about a woman getting in a car crash and having her face changed and going from, like, incredibly beautiful to normal beautiful. I'm not sure David Foster Wallace was equipped to explore that in any kind of way. He didn't really. She was a quirky character. She ran this, like, radio show that people were really into, and I don't know if she started or was just a member of this group for the disfigured, and she wore this veil all the time, and this stuff is, like, almost interesting, but we don't really get to know her as a character that well. I mean, it dives into her experience of depression. I just feel like the whole concept of beauty lost was not adequately explored, and in fact, she was still objectified even with her veil. I mean, I feel like one of the characters talked, like, incessantly about how, like, great her body was, and it just felt a little weird though. It's like, oh god, okay, we had this beautiful character who now is covering up her face, and still all we can talk about is how beautiful she is. I don't know. I didn't love it. I felt like it was almost good. I almost liked that part. I just felt like something was missing, which is a really funny thing to say. I'm not saying you should have written more. Maybe cut some stuff and then add some stuff. I don't know. Okay. 21 minutes in. I wonder if anyone's still watching. Okay. So, now that we've talked about the book, I think that's actually all I really want to say about the book itself. Now I want to talk about, like, the culture surrounding this book. There's this really funny Reductress article. Let me look up what the title was. It's called Why I'm Waiting for the Right Man to Tell Me to Read Infinite Jest. And that is a really funny article, and that really made me think, because I really did read this book because enough guys told me to. That is just a fact of my experience. Like, I don't have statistics on who likes this book and why, but in my personal experience, like, a lot of guys told me to read it. One of my brothers, it's one of his favorite books. I dated somebody who was obsessed with this book. Somebody in one of my writing classes told me about it. I mean, like I said, he came into class with that glow of, like, I just finished Infinite Jest. It's so good. You have to read it. Everyone has to read it. And they convinced me, and they were wrong. So, I don't know. That's a thing worth mentioning. Finally, I need to share an anecdote that I feel like it's almost not believable. This book, it's so funny to me that it's called Infinite Jest, and it is a joke. Like, among a lot of, like, women readers and writers, like, this book is a joke. This book is a punchline. And I mean no disrespect, by the way, to the now deceased David Foster Wallace, who seemed like he really obviously struggled with serious mental health issues, and, you know, perhaps if he were still alive, maybe I wouldn't even be making this video. I'm not trying to, like, kick someone while they're down, but I don't know. Okay. What was I saying? Okay. But yeah, this is a little bit of a joke among, like, women readers and writers, and that's why I think it's so funny that this thing happened to me. Okay, story time. I went to a party at this place. Well, I'm not going to be specific about, like, where I live and stuff, but there's this, like, basically commune type place out where I live, up in the hills, that I went to a party there where some friends of mine were living, and I met this guy who introduced himself as a writer. And I was like, oh, cool, I'm a writer too. I'm trying to really own that term, you know. It's hard, I think, to call yourself a writer for some reason, even though no one walks around being like, I play golf, but I'm not a golfer. You know, like, it's weird. But I'm trying to really own that term. You know, I have published stuff. I'm continuing to publish stuff. I write almost every day of my life. I'm a writer, whatever. But I was trying to hint at that a little bit with him, like, oh, I'm trying to call myself a writer. And he was like, yeah, I mean, I guess anybody could call themselves a writer, like, you probably write emails. And that was, like, a weird intro, but I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. He is someone at this party. I'm not great with parties. He wants to talk about books. Okay. He asked me my favorite book, and I said The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, and I asked him his favorite book, and he says Anna Karenina, and I said, you know, I almost want to read Anna Karenina, but I'm kind of done with long books, because I read Infinite Jest, and I did not like it. And I swear, like, he doesn't hear the words are coming out of my mouth. He just hears, like, buzzword, writery buzzword, Infinite Jest, and he just says, oh, Infinite Jest, okay. And so, pause, caveat, maybe he wasn't talking as much to me. There was one other person there that he might have felt the need to, like, catch up to speed. But if anyone's going to catch this person up to speed, like, I actually read the book, okay? I just said that I read the book. And he turns to, like, me and this other person, and he's like, oh, yeah, David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest. It's a very long book. Supposedly one of the best books of the last, like, 30 years. And he does, like, a couple more sentences of explaining what this book is, which he had not read. I asked him, have you read it? And he said, no. Like, why are you doing this? You are explaining Infinite Jest to a woman who's read it when you haven't read it. That is hilarious. That is so funny. That is so on brand for this book. Okay. This is almost a half an hour video. I think I have to stop talking now. I really hope that people enjoyed it. I'm gonna make more book videos, whether anyone watches them or not, whether they like them or not. Hopefully you like them. Hopefully I find a new audience if all the lucid dreaming people are like, hey, what are you doing? This isn't lucid dreaming. Hopefully I find some booktube people, because I really love watching these videos, so that makes me want to be good at making them, but I'm going to try my best. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Don't read Infinite Jest. Have a good day.